So let's get started. I think there's some people that are still coming in here, but we'll let them have the front because I feel very lonely up here. I thought everybody's going to kind of rush the front. Anyway, thanks for coming. I know it's, I guess it's middle of the quarter, so I guess it's a good time to be here. I met somebody the other day said there's no better time than in between midterms and dead week, so I think I picked a good time. Before I start, I want to confess something. I looked at the list this morning. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and looked at the list of all the people that were here. And I looked at an amazing list of folks that are education experts. And that's the last thing of who I am. I'm not far from an education expert. So I freaked out a little bit. Then I went over to my teenage son's room and said, hey, what should I talk about? I'm not an education expert, but I'm supposed to talk about education. And he said, well, just tell a lot of jokes. And I looked at him and I said, well, you know I'm not funny, right? And he said, okay, you're right. Why don't you just stay in your lane then? And so that saying is actually very telling to what I'm going to talk about. In fact, I'm not going to listen to him and not stay in my lane. I'm going to encourage you guys to take risks and come to my lane. The lanes are tech and education as the metaphors of two different paths that people have taken in this industry. And what I'll talk about is how we need to bridge that gap and to come together, talk the same language. So what I'm not going to do is stay in my lane. I'm going to try to reach out and talk a little bit more about how we can communicate between tech guys, entrepreneurs, as well as educators. So that's basically the net of the talk. If I do veer away from my lane and I'm saying things that I don't know much about, please raise your hand and say that's not the way it works. Because like I said, we're here to communicate, and that's the whole goal of the conversation. So making a big impact in education via technology, innovation. Let me first talk about something I do know very well, which is my background. Let me introduce myself first. So my personal story is I was born and raised in Mexico City and came when I was 13, not knowing any English at all. It's when this is important because at 13, teenager in San Diego, education for me became not a nice to have, but a must have. I needed to learn English, otherwise I wouldn't survive in Southern California as a Mexican. So to me, education became sort of this must-have situation. And in some cases, it's not that for many people. And I would contend today that education, and not only education up to 21 years old, but education through your life is going to become incredibly important. I'll talk about why that is, more than ever, in fact. After that, grew up in California, in Southern California, and came to Stanford as an engineering major. And I fell in love with sort of innovation, technology, and also startups. So I went to do an MBA at Harvard, and then I came right back. And most of my career, I spent it here in technology, nothing to do with education technology, until about 10 years ago when I became an investor at Northwest, and I made my first investment in EdTech about 10 years ago now. Some worked, some didn't, and over those 10 years, started in 08, like I said, and now it's 2010 to 2018, so 10 years. And some did work. These are 4 that are notables, but just remember, for every notable one, I've had many, many failures. So that's the nature of the business, and that's an important lesson too. So when I look at this, the one thing that came to me, and like I said, in 2017 or so, is a lot of these companies are reaching a lot of students. Forget about the revenue model and sort of dollars and cents. That's not necessarily what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk more about the impact that people are making, these companies are making it onto the students, and whether or not they're actually doing good or bad, right? I think you would think that there's very positive change, and so we need to pay attention as educators. And so that would be my urge to you guys, is to understand these companies and others a lot better. the one I'm on the board of that I'm very proud of is Udemy. It's a lifelong learning company. The reason that's important for me is because education in my mind has extended beyond just 5 years old to, let's say, 18 or 21 years old. And in some cases, if you're doing a master's like most of you guys or a PhD, it's going to be much longer than that. But at the end of the day, most people think that you end your educational life at 24 or 25 or 28. It's not about that. Udemy has now proven, because of the trends in the market that I'll talk about, that we are now going to be continuous learners, and we have to be if we want to keep up with the changes that are happening in the tech world, primarily, and globalization. So I talked about being an alum. I talked about being a tech investor, but the real reason I ended up here, and I'll talk about what the GSC Entrepreneur in Residence program is, or what we intended to make it. But before I go there, let me tell you why I really came here. I have 3 roles: alum, a tech investor. Most importantly, I'm a dad of 3 kids. This is Nico, the smart-ass 16-year-old. Isabella, and this is Mia. Mia, when 2 years after I started investing in education, which would have been 2010, she was a kindergartner, and we diagnosed her, or she couldn't learn how to read very easily. So my wife and I we did all kinds of diligence and dug into, we both, sort of type A, dug in very deeply, try to figure out how to assess what's going on with her because she wasn't learning how to read. We ended up finding a place in Redwood City that was unique to this area. Not many places like this. So we were very lucky to find this place that would assess her. Turns out that she was dyslexic. And then we said, well, what do we do? She's bound to start first grade in a public school. We could have gotten her an IEP, an independent educational program, and so that in itself is a whole hurdle for parents, and we had to go through that. But then there's another resource we had in Belmont called Charles Armstrong School that's focuses specifically on dyslexics. She went through that school 3 years, taught her incredible amounts on how to read and how to become an efficient learner. Now she's the most avid learner that we have in our family, right? Success story. But that told me one thing, back then and even now more so than ever before, is that I had to go through a lot of hoops and spend a lot of money to get all of that set up, right? And in reality, technology could have solved a lot of it for a lot cheaper. So the one question I posed myself before even coming to the GSC is, do we think that technology can make a difference, right? Do we think that using technology can solve things like inequity and at a larger scale? Because that's one issue that I always wrestle with in venture capital is, can we make it large scale? Right? The thing about dyslexia to me that is atrocious and why I want to focus on it, and I'll tell you at the end what we could do about it, is that if you don't assess it, if you don't diagnose it at kindergarten or first grade, what happens is a lot of the kids grow up until they're 4th or 5th. There's plenty of studies that tell you that they start hating school. And if the premise of my presentation is that you have to be a happy lifelong learner, if you know that you're not a smart person by 4th grade, then you're never going to be a smart person and a happy person. And to me, you're basically throwing away, I think one study says that 1 out of 5 kids in the world have some sort of learning difference, but yet most of them don't get diagnosed. And even if they get diagnosed, the parents have stigma around it or think that it will go away with age, and that's misinformation as well. So the net of it all is that there's a lot that information that the internet and technologies can use or can leverage to solve a problem like this. And this is just one that hits close to home, but there's so many that technology can solve. So when we think about social impact, and you guys as future workers in education can do, there's no more, I think, and I'm biased, but we'll discuss it, is I think there's no more impact that you can make than to actually figure out how to use technology, a leverageable tool like that, to impact the world, right? And so let's figure out how to do it. Before we go into that, let me tell you a little bit about the Entrepreneur in Residence program. This is this is really Jeff Cox's invention, really. When I came to talk to mainly Paul Kim, who's the CTO here, we're interacting, we're exchanging ideas on education in general, trends, mega trends, technology. And so one of the things that I told him is, hey, I'm seeing this in technology, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about these trends. And the GSC had an appetite to bridge the gap, so to speak, with industry. So they created this program where I'm the first person sort of going through this program called the Entrepreneur in Residence program. All I'm trying to do is to sort of lay a foundation for surfacing key trends in sort of the fast-growing industry of EdTech. And I'll talk to you how fast it's growing and how big it is. Raise awareness between Silicon Valley and the GSE. Maybe even think about how to translate each other's lingo, because that's part of the issue, is that we speak a different language in academia versus in technology. Perhaps even develop a strategy for how we could work together between the two. And maybe these are some of the outcomes that we can come out of it. New projects, a new course. I'm looking to teach a course in the fall that will very much focus on this deeply. So if you guys are around, I'll tell you more about that. New research opportunities. We already started working with some, for example, some predictive analytics companies that are out there, so that they can partner with professors here and essentially make sense of the data, create insights out of the data. So that's an example of new research opportunities. And hopefully what we're talking about today and ongoing is how do we pick the right employment for ourselves, the right employment. So I'll help you through that. Use a venture capital or maybe more of a entrepreneur mindset to make sure that you land in the right place. Because there's a lot of companies out there that are not going to make it. I'll be completely clear about that. And I want to give you the tools, especially through this course, on how to assess which ones will have the chance to make it and which ones won't. So that's part of my focus here and in my course in the fall. Any questions about the EIR? I was just planning to kind of do 1 year at a time, so we'll go 1 year at a time. I don't know if Jeff has any other ideas, but I think we're going to try to figure out milestones, and if it's successful, it could be I'm hoping it could be very impactful, because I think you guys are here for 1 year, and most MAs are here for 1 year, MA MBAs for 2, so you gotta continue to have this as a resource for the students, not just for one class, right? I hope. We'll see. Okay, so this is one of the most interesting and simple charts. This is actually a Stanford alum as well. He's the captain of moonshots. Do you guys know who he is? He's the guy that started all the Google X sort of moonshot projects, including the driverless car with Sergey Brin as well. He basically laid this out, and to me it struck me. I think it was at a TED Talk he laid this out. He said, look, in past industrial revolutions, you have technology moving at a pretty linear speed, and so human adaptability, which is education's one part of it, but government systems, policies are also part of human systems that don't scale at the speed of technology. But in the past, it was okay because we could adapt to it, right? We weren't in exponential speed. What all of Silicon Valley focuses on is this chart. Let's make sure that we make this as vertical as possible, right? Which then puts a lot of pressure on these guys, us, humans. So this gap is sort of, what do we do about this gap, right? To me, one part of the answer is let's continuously learn, and let's continuously innovate, and let's continuously try to keep up. It's not going to be easy to keep up, governments are seeing that today with policies that are antiquated day over day because of technologies like driverless cars or even things like ride sharing, right? Examples like that tell you that just government can't keep up. Education can't either. So this is not news to you guys. This, to me, is pretty important. Is how do we teach our kids, my kids, how to be adaptable enough to be in a job once they get out of college that they actually can adapt to, right? That they could, if it hasn't been invented, how do you train for it, right? So to me, part of the entrepreneurial mindset and why I think is this entrepreneur in residence program is important is to not only to have a mindset that where you actually take risks, are okay with ambiguity, adaptability, lifelong learning, so loving learning. Those are skills that we should all have, but also I'm hoping my kids will have so that they could adapt to whatever comes, right? And this is what's coming. Hard and furious. I'll tell you, I think I mentioned this before. There's 15,000 EdTech teams that are in 50 countries with $50 billion of investment. And that's incredible, right? It's an incredible number. It's growing very fast. How do you know which one's going to make it, right? Or how do you know which one's going to be impactful for students, for administrators, for any school? Reality is my guess is that's probably 90 to 95, if not more, will not make it. And I'll tell you why, one of the reasons they won't make it. A lot of these guys are not really reaching out to educators from the beginning to build their companies or their products with the right learning science, the right pedagogy, the right structure from an educational perspective to be successful. A lot of them have small markets. A lot of them have the wrong content. But this is the equivalent of just throwing stuff on the wall, getting some seed money, and then figuring out if it sticks or not. Sometimes it does stick, and that's one way to do it. What I would say is that if educators were to reach out and figure out which ones have more of a chance of success and work early with those companies, there will be a lot higher successes and less waste and much more and better outcomes. So that's one reason why I think bridging this gap, speaking their language, understanding how to assess these companies may be an interesting skill to have. Okay, so now not all of them have gotten, not all of them are going to be failures, right? A lot of them will be. It's the nature of the beast, but I think in education, to be clear, the conventional wisdom in venture capital is that education is a very, very hard place to invest, and there's more traps than in any other industry. I think healthcare is maybe has some what they would call inside baseball and really intricate things you need to know in order to be investing in healthcare because it's a tricky industry. I think most people think that education is as difficult or even more difficult. I actually think there's a lot. It makes a lot of sense that once you figure out some of the traps and some of the things to look for, and so these companies do prove it, right? You guys use Canvas, 3,000 universities and schools globally. They're by all standards a success, right? They're more of an infrastructure solution for students, but it makes your life much more efficient, I think. It could be better, but it's a good tool. Chegg, I'll talk a little bit about. It's a company that I'm very impressed with because of the approach they took. They started with what I would consider a bad idea, and they pivoted into a great outcome, right? And a great outcome for a lot of students. They reach 40 million students per year in 6,500 universities with a variety of products, tutoring, to notes, to also materials that they exchange both online and offline. So they have quite a reach into schools, into universities. Class Dojo is a K through 12 or K through 8 tool. I'm not sure if are you guys familiar with Class Dojo? 90% of of K through 12 uses it, mainly to communicate in a community between parents, teachers, and kids. So it creates community. And then at Pluralsight, which is sort of rumored to be going public, is a company that's gotten really sizable in the lifelong learning space, 150 countries. They employ 1,300 teachers, and they created 5,000 courses. And that's in addition to the ones that I had already mentioned. One that I really like is, I didn't mention very much, the learning experience. They're in pre-K education. I think it's a great segment to look at. Udemy I mentioned, and obviously a lot of these you might know. Turnitin is another one that we've invested in at Norwest, and they're doing extremely well in sort of assessing plagiarism, but also to help people write better in college. Lynda, LinkedIn, huge. Kahoot is one that I really love. My kids love to use it. It's the gamification in the classroom. So using games to engage kids. That's, I think, a theme that could be you could extrapolate it into many different subjects. So hopefully that'll be a case study of other things that could come that could be as big as that, right? So let's get into kind of the how can we work with this industry, and what are the kind of things that could be interesting to learn. And again, I'm just gonna touch on things at a very high level. So the question I have for you guys is, how could educators collaborate with technologies more effectively to deliver high quality education on a large scale? I'll tell you two anecdotes that are sort of I'd say learning lessons for me. And that'll hammer the point on where I'm trying to get to with this. When I first started investing in education, I invested in a company that I'm not going to name that focused on selling into schools, universities, a way for professors to pick the material they're going to use for their courses, and then allow the students to buy that material, both books as well as handouts, as well as online material. So it was, I thought, hey, okay idea, good idea. It was my first investment in 2008, so I didn't know much about the industry. I still learn a ton every single day in the industry because it's a very complex system. It completely failed. After giving him a lot of money, multiple rounds, it failed completely. And then I went back post-mortem and through the years and to try to understand why is it that they didn't make it. It turns out they didn't involve educators, people that knew how the university system worked very well. The CEO and the team didn't come from, they had never taught, they had never been an administrator in university, and they didn't ask the right questions to bring those inputs in. That stuck with me. The product, they didn't know how to sell the product, what product to build. They didn't understand the sales cycles. They didn't understand that even universities shut down in the summer and little things like that. So, so look, they showed me this plan. I love this chart because most entrepreneurs show me this plan, but in reality, it's this that matters. So the grit and resilience that you show through these stumbles is what makes you succeed. In this case, they didn't know how to navigate through the stumbles because they just didn't ask the right questions. They didn't have the right growth mindset. They didn't reach across the aisle, the proverbial aisle, to come here and involve some people in the GSE or any educator. So to me, that's a big lesson, and that cost all of us efficiency. A lot of people lost their jobs and a lot of money lost. Had we had somebody in there, influential, with the right lingo to speak that could communicate with the entrepreneurs from an educational background, I think this would have been a success. We would have pivoted nicely in the right way to get to the right answer. Contrast that with another company, the one I mentioned is Chegg. Chegg right now, it's a company that's, I would say they're reaching almost a Fortune 1000 level. They're a huge publicly traded company now, run by a person that I respect a lot, Dan Rosenzweig. He is he used to work at Yahoo, so he didn't come from education. But what I didn't know, I looked at the company way early when they were very little for investment, and I said, look, these guys are trying to rent books, textbooks. It's it's a hard market. Textbooks are going to go away. It's very capital intensive. I'm going to pass, right? So I passed. So big mistake, because what I failed to understand is that even though the CEO didn't come from the industry, he was very, very focused on reaching out and bringing people that knew the industry. So he ended up moving away from renting books. He pivoted, so he made a dramatic change, and he partnered with educators by both partnering with their companies. So, for example, there was a lady here that started a company called Insta.edu, a graduate from Stanford that started a tutoring business. She ended up merging or selling the company to Chegg and working in the company, and that became Chegg Tutoring Services. There's 2 or 3 others that did the same, that came from academia, that partnered with Chegg, and Dan was very open-minded to welcoming those voices. And by the time he went public, people were still not believers that he could make it. But in the last 2 or 3 years, he's made a massive transition. So now book renting is not even a big part of his business. It's mostly the businesses that his partners, basically educators, had built in collaboration with Chegg. So big success, and it's not easy to pick. It's not easy for me to see that was going to happen, but it starts with the mindset of the entrepreneur, which is one lesson that I would leave with you guys. If you do end up joining one of these companies, spend a lot of time with your boss's boss, and try to understand their philosophy around this bridging the gap, because that to me is what's going to make success in most cases. In other cases, it may not, right? They may be able to delay the partnership with the educator just because they got lucky, but in most cases, you do need to have the 2 voices come together. Do you guys have any questions? I'm like talking, but I wanted to make it more interactive, because you guys probably have other questions. I picked out a lot of the questions from Narita's Ed Careers, so I have them here. I know what's on your mind, or at least in your collective mind.
So as an investor, how do you, if you think it's still a good idea that they haven't bridged the gap, do you use kind of your influence to give that type of advice when you're looking at potential portfolio companies?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it depends what the specific need is. Right now, I think, and I'll talk about, one of the things I wanted to talk about is where a lot of the GSC graduates have gone. I was very surprised. I have a very short list, but obviously we have a bigger list. A lot of them have ended up in jobs that are very influential and very impactful in some of those tech companies. So I'll show a little bit of that. That's from an investor's perspective, that's great, because there's that voice inside that is influential. So a lot of the LDT folks end up in specific roles. Polls folks end up in specific. So there's almost like another talk we can do around sort of the trajectory of different graduates, and I think it could kind of demystify what the industry. What I'd love to see is that demystify what the education industry or education tech industry values as skills, and what the students here have as skills, because they're very translatable, right? It's just that the language is not necessarily all there, all common language. But yes. Any other questions, or should I keep going? How are we doing on time? Good? Yeah, that's a great question because that goes into a little bit of the science of due diligence and what we do. There's probably 7 different criteria that we look at, and you could look at it when you first make the investment. 7 different criteria from market size to value proposition to pain point. What is the issue? Is it a team issue? Is it a lack of team diversity and inclusion issue? So there's almost like 6 or 7 that I'm actually going to list out. I won't be able to go into each diligence item in depth, but I was, we could spend hours on it. But I think the most important thing is that you know that these checklists need to be looked at, and you can look at them when you first invest. So that's one. But when things go awry, you should revisit that list because you should say if it's a market issue, then you should definitely pivot because the market's not there, right? If it's a team issue, well, who are we missing? What skills are we missing? So there's different answers depending on what diagnosis you have for the issue that you're seeing. So there's no one answer, but you almost can use this checklist to say, okay, what is really my issue, right? And once you assess it, then you know how to pivot. We could talk more specifically to what you're describing. Maybe I can help you more specifically, but maybe this could help at least at a high level. Huge, yeah, great question because I think that takes me to 3 slides from now. And I'm going to touch on that specific thing. There's a framework that I like to use. I won't be able to give you the answer, otherwise I'd run out and invest in it. But you could invest in it with your own time and your own energy. But I'll give you the framework that we use, and I think that's part of thesis development and then diligence. So those are the 2 things that if you develop those 2 skills, even though they seem they should be taught in GSB, by the way, that's part of bridging the gap because that's what I'm hoping is that you guys reach into the GSB a little bit or the Graduate School of Engineering, and I'm hoping those guys reach into you and the GSB does as well. So it'll sound very businessy, but that's part of assessing where you should be working and spending 2-3 years of your life, multiple hundreds of hours. So it's investment in you, right? So this is kind of to your point, the framework. There's 2 things. First, what we try to do, and hopefully what you would do is if you're looking at a new company or a new organization, non-for-profit, doesn't matter if it's non-for-profit or for-profit, but if you're looking at a new education technology company that doesn't not obviously already have massive success, like in the case of academia at Stanford, right? That's known commodity. You know what it's going to do. You know it's doing well and all of that, hopefully, for a long time. But if you're looking at a young company that is sort of trying to disrupt, and that word is a loaded word, it's just trying to do something very hard, innovative. Let's call it that. We look at what is driving it, the mega drivers. So what is changed in our world, independent education industry? What are the big shifts in the plates of the world, right? The plate tectonics have shifted. And these are basically 3 that we picked out. This was I did this about 4 or 5 years ago. These haven't changed. I mean, social, massive land movement, the creation of social, and for good or for bad, because there's some things that are very positive, some things that are very negative. Cloud technologies, huge, and mobile, right? These are not, it's not earth-shattering, but how they translate into this specific world is kind of where things start making sense on where to look for interesting companies, right? If they have mobile cloud, they might have some way to create a real-time, bi-directional content something or other, right? Which makes it, by the way, from a student's perspective, that makes it so that you get real-time feedback on whatever you're learning. We never had that before. We had books, and they don't talk back to you, or you have your teacher, and they have 20 other students, so they can't give you real-time feedback. So think about things that give you incredibly fast turnaround so you could actually iterate and learn faster, right? And back to my point of how can you actually learn much more efficiently to continuously be up to date, right? So, I can give you examples there, online marketplaces, peer-to-peer, games and gamification, things like that. There's a lot in that sort of logo slide that do have that component, so that might be a place to look. Other new consumption experiences. I mean, one thing that I noticed is mobile and cloud give you the ability to sort of be completely untethered to a classroom, right? So this is obviously, this was done four years ago or so, or 4 years ago. So flipped classroom models, a way for you to kind of ingest information solo, but then interact with your community. So that's not, but there's going to be more innovation in that space. And then finally, another one that I thought was pretty interesting is how do you use your peer set now in real time to collaborate in a much more efficient way? Because I always thought when I came to school here or at Harvard, I always loved the fact that I learned just as much, if not more, in the dorm than I did in the classroom, right? And that was pretty cool because I had so many interesting people to talk to. Now we can emulate that online, right? You don't have to be in the dorm. So how do you create a community-driven, collaborative approach? Like this is where, for Class Dojo is doing some of this, right? Because they're interacting parents, teachers, and kids. But there's many. Kahoot is doing the first one. Udemy is doing the first one. But there's combinations of them too. So this is kind of a framework. So the things where you shouldn't look is something that looks very much status quo. Like how do you put a book into an iPad? That's not that cool, right? Not that innovative. So think of things that are truly being enabled by this, and they can only ask the question, why now? Because why now? Without this, without this, for example, there could not be an Uber, right? That's a different industry, but you had to have this to have that invention, right? So, and then once we have a framework, these are the things that I'd love to spend much more time on, and I would in the fall, if you're here. This is some of the things that we would look at. We'd bring in companies and then really assess 7 areas of due diligence and go deep in it, right? Understand, is the purpose and the mission clear? How do you assess that? What do you think about? What questions do you ask? Or who's your real customer and what is their pain point, right? Think about that because if it's not, if it's a nice to have or a thing that is sort of they call it it's a vitamin. The solution's a vitamin, not medicine. Then it's probably not a must-have. It's just a nice to have. So the pain point needs to be substantial compared to what's existing today, right? Versus what the invention is, the value proposition needs to kind of solve that pain point. So we'd go through sort of examples of how people have done it, right? And so a lot of times we see companies that do that think they're doing something really revolutionary and really different, but in reality they're just kind of improving in a very evolutionary way the status quo, and that's just hard because I think big players can do better. They have more money, they have more resources, so you have to kind of invent something new. It's Goliath versus David, and you got to play the David. In startup land, you got to play David, not play the Goliath game, right? Then this is, I think, the number 6 is where I think a lot of people fall off. They just don't know. Technologists don't know whether it's working. They use A/B testing and reviews, like those little stars, and so at the end of the day, there is already a ton of knowledge here of whether the student's learning, whether it's effective, and so I always ask this question, and people look at me like, well, they keep coming back and purchasing, and they put up 5 stars or 4.5. They must be good content. In reality, you guys are super better positioned to understand the learning science, the efficacy of the product, and so you could assess it much better. You may not be able to assess the usability of the flow click by click. Product managers do that really well, but you will if you kind of spend time on that part as well. And so I think there's a ton of skills that they don't reach out and ask for where this becomes a real crutch for them. And then finally, I think there's a misconception that entrepreneurship should all be done for profit. I just think you need to find a company that is either for-profit or non-for-profit, but is sustainable, economically sustainable. That doesn't mean just go every year go ask for money, because unless you have the cure for cancer, it's going to be very hard to continuously raise grants from philanthropy. So find yourself a way to, even if you're not going to make it for profit, find a way to charge for it, or find a way to make it economically feasible so you can grow, right? Or make it for profit, but make sure, in my ideal world, you do both, right? Because it shouldn't be completely orthogonal that you make money, but you also do good. In fact, most companies should be doing that, and they do that for the most part. But that is a contentious point, and when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, people think that the capitalism world may not be necessarily tied. That is actually big discussion, right? I do believe that a lot of these companies do good, but also they need to be self-sustaining. Otherwise, you can't hire people. So with that, I'm going to make a quick pitch for my course, and then I'll open it up to questions. But before I give you my own assessment of my own startup that I'd love to use my own framework for. So this course, like I said, I'm not going to spend much time on it. It's in the fall. It's going to be, I'm going to bring 6 to 8 speakers that are companies that I think are uniquely, that have a unique invention in the EdTech. Where I'm going to have the speaker, and then we're going to apply that model of diligence and framework to sort of to analyze the company, and more in the mindset of you guys using that framework to then apply it to your own company. So at the end of the quarter, we would have a specific company you want to pick that you could analyze, and you could actually perhaps even work in to bring your own project together. So I'm not going to spend much time on this one because I want to get to my own project. So remember Mia? Mia, dyslexic little girl. And remember my smart-ass 16-year-old, right, Nico? So Nico's turned out, he's a junior now. He's turned out to be a great CS guy. He actually spent summer here. He learned how to code Swift and Java, and he's kind of like this, loves to code. So I said, hey, Nico, and Mia's doing great. She's very studious and all that, but she inspired us to actually potentially start working with some other students, hopefully, to start thinking about how can we create an app or a service that the purpose, so I can go through the 7. The purpose is to make sure that the 1 out of 5 kids that should be getting diagnosed with learning differences get diagnosed, but using not a very expensive sort of manual labor testing service like we had to use, but using a very automated sort of very, very low cost assessment tool, right? So that could be an app, that could be a service, that could be tech-enabled service. We don't know yet. The target student would be the ones that don't get diagnosed but should, right? We give this to everybody, right? Because there are a lot of parents that don't have the economic means to pay for any kind of assessment, or they may be scared or may think that this is a social negative thing on their kid because they're going to call them dumb, right? Or something like that. So we have to create a product that actually educates but also serves the assessment. The pain point we talked about, value proposition, we have to flesh out, but it would essentially be around technology that is mobile, that is very easy to use, has some sort of secret sauce. So this is where the educators here that know learning differences should inject a lot of their research, and so hopefully we can get to work with some of them, and then hopefully it'll be substantially better than what's out there or what I had to go through, and hopefully it'll work, and we'll figure out how to make it economically viable. But that's an example, a very, very fast way of what we would go through in companies that we would analyze if we were analyzing a company. This is more of a new company that we're looking to kind of start on a new product, but it just gives you a flavor of the kind of exercise we'd go through. So with that, I'm right on time. And any questions about anything, by the way?
So earlier you talked about when we are looking at startups ourselves, we should be more careful about the mindset of the CEO and everything they're doing. Could you talk a little bit more about how to go about that if we don't have the access to hang out with the CEO a lot? Like if we have one conversation, what are signals to look for to know if this is the person with the right mindset?
Yeah, that some of the things that I would look for is decisions that they've made in their life, for example. We spend a lot of time thinking through how they made decisions, whether they're inclusive and whether they think about all the angles. So sometimes in their LinkedIn profiles, on their resumes, there's transitions they've made that don't make much sense. If I were to meet them, I would ask them about those. For example, that's one trick not trick, but just one area where we focus is life-changing decisions are oftentimes where you show your judgment. And so I think that's one. But again, it's not a science proof. I think you'd also do a lot of referencing. Uh, in Silicon Valley, a lot of people know of a lot of people, and so by reputation, especially if they're already been in technology for a while, they're probably and they're CEOs. They probably have been through a lot of different jobs, so you may be able to get to people that know them. But you're right. I mean, I think it's harder to do diligence when you don't have full access to the person. You can also, what's happened in the CS department, by the way, which is actually very self-reassuring, is that they already have a lot of their own graduates go to the specific companies. And so, for example, Palantir is a good example of a lot of people that go to Palantir from the CS department. They actually reference each other. So the CS guys that are inside the company tell you, hey, this is a really good CEO to work for. This is a good company to work for. Or hey, I want to move jobs. I hate this company. So that tells you a lot, right? Right now, GSC is a lot smaller, but you already do have graduates that are there. So you could actually start accessing them. By the way, there's some graduates here, like I know Paige is here. She's a graduate of '05 of Pulse. She's looking to start a company, hire maybe 1 or 2 LDT students in the writing space, K through 12. So she's just getting started. But there's people here from other companies. I think some of the companies that I put up here from Reach Capital, some of them may be here back there. There's also I think maybe we have somebody from Udemy or maybe there you go back there. So there's some people here that you may want to get to know, and if not, we can kind of make sure that you get to know folks that are hiring and have some interesting companies. I specifically invited the ones that I thought had interesting projects, but there's so many opportunities to meet and mingle. But networking is another way to start getting to know the reputation of some of these players. Any?
Do you have some idea about government role?
The government role?
Yeah, especially except that the budget supports. So especially only government can do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been tough. It's been tough from my vantage point to work with directly with government. I think the government that I'm thinking about is it's very decentralized. K through 12 in the U.S. at least is very decentralized to the districts, and so you'd have to sell district, but still the budgets are government budgets. So that's been a real tough way to penetrate. There have been companies that are doing it really, really well. One of the companies that I pointed out, Nearpod, is a good example of companies that have penetrated the districts and are starting to make headway into those areas. But I wouldn't think that that's a fast-moving way to go to market. I'd say that's a way to not go fast, and that's where startups die when you don't go fast. Maybe it is different in other countries though. So I'm just speaking for the US.
In terms of like all these edtech startups, because like it's a growing field, do you see any pitfalls that like a lot of them commonly fall into? I know you said like they don't talk to educators, that's a big one. I would think maybe like compliance with data from like children could be a potential one. I was wondering if you like see any trends.
Yeah, and pre-K and K through 12, and basically everywhere, for that matter. If you're actually touching the consumer, whatever consumer that is. So you have to define your segment, your initial segment, very, very tightly, so that you actually go out and to people that can give you the right data. It could be signal, not noise. So if you are going after, let's say, pre-K, you want to be. I mean, I think we were just talking about this. I think the best way to start a company in pre-K is to actually work inside pre-K. So, for example, here you have Bing, right? Bing probably has 3 or 4 uncreated or not yet created startups that, by you observing and being very, very observant inside Bing, you'll come up with at least 2 or 3 great startup ideas just by observing the kids and by talking to the kids, by talking to the parents. The parents happen to be very pro startup. So that's one resource that gives you the access to pre-K. Obviously, a segment that, by the way, don't be fooled by the segment itself is not general America. So that's another issue you need to kind of think about. But at least kids are kids, so you at least get an inkling, a hypothesis that you can then test out elsewhere, right?
In answer to this question, if you went back to your slide of the seven key questions to look at,
Yeah.
you can point to people who run up on the shoals of each one of those, whether they are solving a problem that someone else paid for, or that maybe they're doing a Me Too. But if you actually want to do this, you could find records of a lot of startups on each one of those.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah, there's so many ways to get in trouble, basically. So and so many ways to salvage your company too. So it's not an easy business to start a company, but if you're, but it's also not rolling the dice either. That's what I worry about with a lot of people that don't know this world. Is not necessarily pure luck either. It's actually, there's a lot of science to it, but you just gotta, again, bridge the gap to that world that looks a lot more and talks a lot more like maybe the engineering school or the business school, and it's okay. I don't talk education, but I'm here, right? So I think it's good to just feel a little uncomfortable in the wrong school or in the different school, and then you'll learn how to deal with this, I think.
From your perspective, can you name other like big challenges you see in working in K-12? I know you briefly mentioned like having to sell district to district. What are other bigger challenges?
Yeah, the typical one that I see is if you're going to top down, so district to parent to teacher to student, so students being at the sort of the ground floor, and if you're selling into the district, it's speed to get to the budget, right? That's the tough one. If you go backwards, the challenge is how do you figure out how much to charge, how much people are willing to pay? Because if you, for example, Kahoot is a good example. They've gotten 71 million uniques a month that are using it feverishly, but for the most part is very lightly monetized, right? So it's not in the place where it's self-sustaining yet, but it could be, right? So those are the 2 things that I see mostly, but there's also things that are, you want to make sure that you're not just doing something that's very siloed, because it'll be hard to turn into a bigger opportunity. So this is where I think Nearpod's doing a good job at sort of creating a content management system, and then you put sort of the content either because you create it or because you partner with somebody. So the way you architect the product itself you want to make sure that it's going to be influential enough, not just I'll give you an example, like a math tutoring or math helper, right? You want to make sure that it's bigger, right? It's bigger than just the app itself, because the app itself may be too small of a problem to solve. So those are some, but I got to think of sort of a bigger list in K through 12. It's a good market if you approach it the right way.
I work for an EdTech company that focuses on K through 12, so I can speak to this a little bit too.
Yeah.
Other things that are common challenges is getting full support, right? So the administration might believe that you're pedagogically sound, the educators you're working with might be pedagogically sound, but parents might be turned off by their students having screen time or not understand how that screen time can be pedagogically sound for their students. So there are real questions around that that are often trouble. Yeah, I think that's a big one that not a lot of people, it's not obvious when you're trying to implement.
Yeah, true. Whether it works or not. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Think about the classic model of venture learning. It's a combination of tech and service-based, feature-based.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on service is not scalable. Service-based businesses are not scalable.
You're right, yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that, the effectiveness versus scalability with respect to service-based ed businesses and tech?
Well, I think services could really work. I mean, there's so many venture fundable companies that are tech-enabled services, but at the end of the day, they're delivered as a service. It just takes longer. You just got to commit to taking longer, making sure you don't grow at a astronomical pace because you have to hire people, and then you degrade the product. A good example is Ben Nelson is an entrepreneur that started Minerva Project that's basically trying to create a full stack university, and he's raised some money and he's doing a great job at he's running it like a new type of university, and it's gonna be great. It's just gonna take a long time to get there. You just got to be funding it the right way and taking the right attitude that it will get there. Right? How it gets there. The learning experience is a good example for us. We invested in it as a company that had already been in business for dozens of years as a late stage investment. They have 300 centers that are focused on pre-K education with their own curriculum. So very effective and very profitable, but it took a long time to get to 300 centers.
So venture capital industries open to service-based tech businesses?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. If it's a huge idea, they may be willing to kind of come in really early. Services, most traditional venture capital investors just come in a little later for services because it's more of a linear growth approach than explosive sort of app, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not money for it. It's just different type of money for it.
We found too that professional developments are often used in like sort of paired with their technology budgets to help cover those services trainings because they see that as professional development for their educators. And you can also use pilot programs in pretty creative ways to
Yeah.
reach a small number of educators that can then sort of evangelize within their own system.
Yeah, your anchor tenant approach may work really well where you get funding by your anchor beginning customers if you're selling to a big enterprise. So that's more of an enterprise approach. That could work sometimes. Good point.
If someone here has a great idea of getting a startup in the education business, so what would be the right path to take and get to you especially and to be able to work with you and what kind of resources you might be able to provide?
Yeah, it depends the type of startup because I think every person focuses on specific type of startup. But generally speaking, I think in this case it's rare because I kind of sit here once a week or so helping students sort of ideate and work on new ideas or maybe even just work on their projects, right? So I'm a resource that is trying to learn from them, but I'm also hopefully helping them as well. As you get going, the most for this type of industry, the one that I would recommend is to join. If you have never done a startup before, some of the things that really do help is to join an incubator that is prominent incubator. So apply to something like a Y Combinator, or there are a bunch in the city in San Francisco. I think that gives you a community of other entrepreneurs that could help bash your idea and work and mold it and really put it to the test. Because I think that plus the combination of the incubator programming plus your peers that are kind of helping you think through your idea, plus your co-founder, plus some angel investing, gives you the ability to get to where bigger VCs are going to invest, which is, do you have an inkling of what we call product market fit? So have you done enough understanding of the market, and is your product sort of starting to kind of fit, or at least do we believe that it could fit that market? Because product market fit is the first thing you look for to get to the semblance of a product that people will buy or people will consume. So that's why a lot of VCs ask you for your traction, right? So if, how many users do you have? How fast is it growing? How many minutes a day do they use it if it's a consumer application? Things like engagement metrics in the consumer side or the student side matter. That's what got me to invest in Kahoot. Is I saw feverish invest in engagement inside the classroom, and my own kids love to learn Spanish. I think it was used in their Spanish class. They love Spanish because of Kahoot. So that sort of speaks volumes to the engagement. Now the question of monetization is a different one, but I would start there. And obviously, if you are a proven entrepreneur, a lot of the VCs will just pile on early and give you money without much proof. That's a bet on the person. So one idea, if you do have a network of people that have followed you in your career, that's another way to get friends and family to fund you initially with angel money. But I find the incubators to be pretty good ways to learn as well, in a practical way, right? Thank you, guys. I'll be around if you guys have any other questions, but I think we're out of time. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.